Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So, um, I'm going to talk really right at the end. I'm not going to go into super specifics about what I'm doing right now, because some of these things will change, but I'm going to talk just an overview. Many of these concepts, for many of you, or will be familiar, but we just want to reiterate some concepts and go through these things one by one, inshallah. So I want to talk about what is sacred knowledge, sacred sciences, the tradition, tutelage, if that's the right word, my messages, the kind of things that I kind of emphasize again and again and again. There are many in reality, but and my areas of focus, and I'll talk about some of the key things that I kind of focus on teaching, etc. So, key concept, sacred knowledge is facts and concepts, right? These facts and concepts, they are supposed to lead to actions, a new modi operandi, right? A new word I learned today. Um, modus, plural. So ways of operating, right? So it's supposed to be a change. You're supposed to be a different person. That's the issue with sacred knowledge. So secular knowledge, you now know a new fact and a new concept. Fantastic. Sacred knowledge, you now know a new fact, a new concept, and it results in actions, right? And new ways of being. You're you're a different person. You see life continually in a new shade, right? So it's not just I become Muslim or I've made Toba, but I'm continually seeing life in a new shade, right? Like cascades of new kind of vistas on how to see things. And sacred knowledge, these are keys, right? That cannot be fashioned upon earth. Meaning, this is not like, you know, I was speaking to my sociology teacher at my undergrad, and she's like, Fareed, the reason why you believe in God is because you're uneducated, and basically you're backwards. And if you get a PhD, you'll see things in a new light, and you won't be religious because religion is made up, and you'll see things in a different way, right? And you become liberal like I am, liberal atheist like I am. So that's a key, right? That has created new actions. She has changed her behavior and new ways of living, right? She looks at things in different ways. I'm sure there's some useful things in it. But these are keys that could be fashioned upon earth, meaning uh, these are things that could be opened up. We can open these things up, right? We can open these things up. So James, for example, you're doing, biology, right? My brother's PhD was on the role of symmetry, right? If you look him up, Kamal Dingle, symmetry in the random changes in RNA, basically in evolution. So the role of, to what extent is symmetry um, competing with natural selection in evolution, right? So these are things that's quite an interesting concept, right? That we look at the world in one way, now we look at the world another way, now we look at the world another way, right? We look at the world as the world is has always been here, and then realizing the world has not always been here, right? We find certain things about the Earth and about the universe that means scientifically these things have not always been here, therefore there must have been some kind of quote unquote Big Bang or whatever. So these are keys that can be fashioned upon Earth, meaning we could come to these conclusions and come to these changes by ourselves. Whereas with sacred knowledge, that's not the case. There is something that is otherworldly, right? There is something that is otherworldly. You are being pulled to another realm. So these are changes, zuhud, right? So through meditation and focus, you can find that if you detach yourself from the world, you can avoid pain and you can become a better person. So a lot of spirituality you can do without religion. It's not a problem. Like you can change yourself without religion. But there's a fundamental difference between some atheist, Buddhist, neo Buddhist monk who has found peace and tranquility in his worldly life through focusing on whatever and finding out that he's kind of inside, he's like a raging, instead of being a raging bull in his head, he's now kind of calm like water, and somebody who connects with Allah. There's a fundamental difference because meditation and focus and self-change, you can work that out on through earth. Whereas pure tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pure ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that those profound changes that happen to an individual through sacred knowledge, this is something else. This is something otherworldly, right? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen, right? Unseen. This is not just a path of self-change. This is a path of opening yourself to be changed by Allah. There's a difference. Does that make sense to both of you?
Yes, that makes sense. Like we're not perennialists. We actually have scripture and we have to follow that.
Yeah. And it's yeah. Um, so and it's doing things that we couldn't do by ourselves. Okay, so sacred sciences then. So these disciplines that we study, they are of two categories: revelatory, shara'i, right? That's called shara'i. When we say shara'i, a dalil shara'i, that means it's from revelation. It is sacred knowledge proper as described, i.e., things that we can't work out by ourselves. So the mind alone could work out that God exists. The mind alone cannot work out how you're supposed to please Allah and how you're supposed to change and how you're supposed to connect to Allah. The mind alone cannot tell you about heaven and hell. Right? There is no logical reason why there is heaven and hell. I'm not saying it's illogical, but I'm saying there's no logical reason for it. It's not something we can infer with the mind alone, right? But rather it's revelation, right? That, so revelation is something very different, something being revealed to us as opposed to we worked it out with our brains. Okay, so it's like Chat GPT with no data. So ChatGPT cannot function without any data. You have to give it data. Otherwise, it's just a program. So that data that is given to us from the other realm, that is sacred knowledge proper, right? That is sacred knowledge proper. Ilm shar'i, right? And then we have what we call ulum al-ala, right? The ancillary disciplines, like research methods, right? So James, for example, doing his PhD, he has to do research methods. That's not biology. That's not chemistry. That's not anything. That's how we do these things, right? How to write, how to use a full stop, right? That is not your PhD. But these are all ancillary, useful or necessary tools to do those things. So when we study religious knowledge, we're studying one of these two things, okay? And so then we look at revelatory knowledge, we're talking about tajweed. So how to pronounce the Quran, that is something from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Ulum al-Quran. Ulum al-Quran meaning how the Quran has reached us, what the Quran is, how it's pronounced, how it's divided up, how it's compiled, what are the qira'at, who are the imams of this, all those discussions that we study in Ulum al-Quran, right? What is tafsir, how does it work, etc. These are revelatory things, right? Things that you can't work out through the mind alone, but rather through revelation. Tafsir, right? Here's a verse of the Quran. What does it mean? Now, in reality, some of this is not actually tafsir. Some of it is not pure revelation, because a lot of tafsir, for example, is linguistic. So therefore, a Christian who understands Arabic really, really well could come along and say that this word means this, and this is the subject of this sentence, and not that, for example, right? And there's other things like that. But a lot of tafsir is revelatory, based on hadith, based on explanation of the salaf of the early Muslims, etc. But it's not something you can infer by yourself. Hadith itself, you cannot write Sahih Bukhari from your own mind. You need the content, right? Um, who narrated the hadith to you? That's not something through your own mind. Okay, and we'll talk about these things in more in detail. Fiqh, right? Uh, and so when we say tafsir, when we say hadith, we mean hadith narration, right? The science of hadith narration, right? And we can add to that today, which is modern hadith narration, which is ilm al-tahqiq, how to do critical addition of a manuscript. right? And gather the manuscripts and critique the manuscripts. That's a science that's kind of it all has always existed as part and parcel of hadith criticism, but it's kind of and it's and but it is kind of part and parcel of hadith narration, but it has a different form, over the last 100 years or so. So hadith narration itself. So the process of narrating the hadith and what that which is narrated, right? That you are sitting there narrating Sunnah Abu Dawood, right? This is revelatory knowledge, right? Along with the chain of transmission, along with the manuscript, along with the paper, along with these things, this is all revelatory knowledge. As hadith criticism, right? Finding out, is this hadith ma'lul? Does it have a hidden error in it? Is this hadith sahih? Is it hadith da'if? Is this narrator reliable, not reliable? This is all revelatory knowledge, right? Um, Explanation of a hadith, right? Explanation of hadith obviously is going to need Arabic for that, of course. Explaining a hadith in the context of another hadith, in context of verse of the Quran, through the eyes of the Salaf, etc. This is all revelatory knowledge, right? So when we're reading Fath al-Bari, Ibn Hajar's commentary on Sahih Bukhari, this is revelatory knowledge. Fiqh. So when we're studying a fiqh book is based on the Quran and Sunnah, which is all revelatory, right? So the rules that we're talking about are all revelatory. Legal maxims that are found in the Quran, in the Hadith, and can be extrapolated and have been extrapolated more and more and more by the scholars of fiqh, right? And the nuances and the exceptions, etc. This is all revelatory. The interpretive methods, usul al-fiqh, right? Usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is part of it is logic, part of it is language, and part of it is revelation. In revelation, there are certain um, tools given to us to interact with revelation, right? There are certain user manuals in revelation of how to interact with revelation. Um, Aqidah, right? Going back to our list here, Aqidah, beliefs, right? What we believe, what we don't believe. This is based on revelation. Now, again, in Aqidah, there are certain things that we can infer through the mind, right? So we know that Allah exists. We know that He's one. We know that He's not two. We know that He exists. We know that He will never stop to exist. Most of them, a lot of things, or not most, but many things that we can say about Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, right? Particularly what He is, um, we can infer through the mind alone. So it's not revelatory in the sense that you couldn't know that revelation, but it is revelatory in that it comes in revelation, and there are certain things as well that are told to us through revelation specifically, right? Um, there's a debate, for example, that Allah speaks. Is that known through the mind? Like, could the mind know, like, without revelation, could you know that Allah speaks? Or is that something through revelation? Is it that Allah has told us that He speaks that we know that, or is it through the mind alone? Issue of debate. So certain things in Aqidah is obvious, right? You don't, um, you could work it out. So it's not all of it is revelatory, but in essence, Aqidah, what we believe, is revelatory, because what we're talking about in Aqidah is what we know as a historical fact and in a linguistic clear sense, what Allah has obliged us to know. So that's essentially revelatory. Purification of the soul. So again, there are certain things you can say, well, how can I cure myself? How can I calm myself down? I keep getting into fights. The guy goes to a atheist counselor and works on some techniques and helps him cool down. That's not really what we're talking about, though, right? When you say purification of the soul, this is a job that the Prophet ﷺ undertook, right? Where you zaki him and he purifies them, right? It's not just that he told them about revelation and he told them about Judgment Day and that changed their behavior, or he told them don't do this and don't do that, so that purified them of certain bad actions. But he did change them fundamentally in terms of their mindset and in terms of how they perceive reality, right? How they looked at things. They became fundamentally different people. They did things that were miraculous on a personal or societal level, right? The Prophet ﷺ gave life to hearts that were dead, right? So this is something that is revelatory, right? In that And we'll talk about this as well. The talaqqi from sheikh to sheikh to sheikh, that you study with people who connected with people who connected with the Salaf, who connected with the Sahaba, who connected with the Prophet ﷺ, that they have this connection. There's a fundamental difference in somebody who reads a book and somebody who is connected to ulama and going back, and they have been changed on a profound level by others. Okay, does that make sense, inshallah?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, so now we spoke about those. Then we have ancillary things. These are essentially non-revelation that we use to understand revelation, right? This is non-revelation that we use um, uh, to access revelation. Okay, so Arabic grammar is not something that's revealed in the Quran and Hadith. Arabic grammar exists outside of the Quran and Hadith, right? There was a book my friend had, which was a commentary on a classic thousand-line poem in Arabic grammar, and the commentary was done by the Lebanese and some Lebanese naval officer, General Antoine Dahdah, Christian, right? General Antoine Dahdah, right? So he's not even Christian. He's not even Muslim. It's got nothing to do with Islam. So Arabic grammar and Islam, they're not related. However, grammar is a tool. Um, it's a tool. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. It is a tool for understanding, an essential tool for understanding revelation. Like we can't understand revelation without grammar. Morphology, word pattern, right? This word is on this word pattern. This letter changes this letter. Fundamental. Phonology, right? Tajweed. So if you look at, for example, Kitab Sibawayh, an ancient book on Arabic grammar, morphology, and phonology, it talks about how you say things. Half of these things are biology, right? When you talk about how somebody speaks and how the S is made and what shape of the mouth and what part of the mouth they use. This is to do with phonology and linguistics and biology. This is not really to do with revelation. But suddenly, biology, phonology, linguistics has suddenly come into my Tajweed class, which is how I interact with revelation, right? So these are part of the ancillary disciplines, but it's not essentially revelation itself, but it is extremely important because if I don't know where to put my tongue, how can I pronounce the lad, right? Rhetoric, right? If you look at the historical development of rhetoric as a science in this Islamic tradition, half of it comes from theological debates. The other half comes from nothing to do with religion. It comes from literary criticism. So literary criticism is not related to Quran and Hadith and anything. But these are really ripe and useful um, useful tools that are essential for understanding the Quran, right? Essential. When I did, for example, had a class in Usul al-Fiqh, which is revelatory science. We study that. We don't study that, and that's part of Sharia. Usul al-Fiqh, the interpretive things. I had a test on grammar, and I had a test on rhetoric. So when we're studying the Quran, I need to know these things. These are very important. Dictionaries. What's a dictionary got to do with revelation? Well, if I didn't know this word, then how am I supposed to understand revelation? A fundamental difference between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is that Islam exists in a complete linguistic environment, right? So I can look language before revelation, during revelation, after revelation, literature before revelation, during revelation, after revelation, a khutbah, somebody giving a speech before revelation, during revelation, after revelation, and I can put it in a context, right? I can understand this word in a context. Whereas biblical Hebrew, how am I supposed to do that? Where's a poem written by some other Hebrew tribe at the time of biblical Hebrew, the time of Musa alayhi salam? Whereas, for example, whereas a speech by some angry chieftain in Bethlehem during the time of Sayyidina Isa, we don't have it. The only, like, we don't, do we even have uh, access to Aramaic, the Aramaic spoken by Jesus alayhi salam? I don't know. James would know you're the brother of Jesus, right? So, um, uh, we don't, that doesn't exist. Whereas Arabic, so a dictionary, grammar, morphology, rhetoric, this is really important because without it, obviously there's no way to understand Revelation. Logic, right? Logic is very important. If you can't think in a logical way and you make gross errors, then uh, obviously you don't have the ability to interpret Revelation. You're gonna come to some crazy conclusions that don't make any sense, right? And so is this something that's absolutely essential? I mean, arguably yes, arguably no, right? The science of debate, right? So this is for yourself, right? So again, research methods. In research methods and debate, these are one thing, right? How are you trying to disprove something or are you trying to prove something? And if you're trying to prove something, how would that look like? And if you're trying to prove something, how would it look like? Like what structure of the argument do you need to do, right? As opposed to shouting and this and this and this. So you're debating with yourself, you're trying to come to a conclusion, or debating with somebody else. How does it work? Right? These are parts of ilm al-bahth wal munadhara. These are part of the ancillary disciplines of Islam, and you can add other things here in Arabic as well. They are part. They're not Islam proper, but they're part of Islam. Now, in reality, a lot of these things, whether they are sacred knowledge proper or not, is debatable. So, is all of tajweed purely riwayah, meaning narration? Like every single thing that we do is just what was narrated from the Prophet ﷺ? Or is there something in the science of tajweed which is taken from phonology, which is taken from grammar, which is taken from morphology, right? And there's a level of scholarly exercise in it, right? In reality, the answer is yes, there is. So not every single thing in tajweed is purely revelatory. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. So this is a key concept, is people saying, I just want Quran and Sunnah. Quran and Sunnah doesn't exist in a vacuum. Tajweed, which is the most simple, fundamentally Qur'ani thing, like I'm just pronouncing the word, I'm not even explaining it. In that process of pronouncing the Quran, there is our input. There's input in it, scholarly efforts are put into it as well. Scholarly discernment, right? So it is not pure in the sense that it's just, I just want revelation. Don't give me anything else. That doesn't actually exist, right? There is a level of human input, human processing, right? A human processing element to all of these things. Ulum al-Quran, a lot of the discussions, does the Quran itself talk about how the Quran should be narrated? Does the Quran itself tell us how the Quran, should be preserved in a physical copy? No, it doesn't. Right? So in Ulum al-Quran, for example, how the Quran was gathered into a Mus'haf, how it was divided up, all these things, that's kind of history, I guess. That's what should be considered Quran, what should not be considered Quran. That's our processing, right? It's not, so there's a lot of discussions there, but it's not just pure revelation. So that's an immature way of thinking, right? An immature way of thinking that I just want revelation. It doesn't really exist. Hadith criticism is clearly not just revelation, right? So here's Sahih Bukhari in one volume. Here is the Tarikh of Imam Bukhari, right there, which is a criticism of narrators. So you look through this book, 11, 12 volumes of who is this narrator? Is he good? Is he bad? Is that in Revelation? So in the Quran and Sunnah, it spoke about a narrator that came 100 years after the Prophet ﷺ and made a mistake in this hadith and didn't make a mistake in that hadith. Is that revelation? So what people will do today, certain groups of scholar people, that um, they will try and um, try and kind of like they try and make what they're doing purely revelation, and they try and ignore the fact that there's other input in that, which is not the case. Whether hadith is sahih or not was not defined by the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ didn't say, by the way, I'm going to say something and this hadith will remain reliable until judgment. It's not like that. That's how Christians think, right? God will preserve the Bible, right? It must be from God. That's not how it works. So the composition of Sahih Bukhari is not based on what the Prophet ﷺ said. It's based on scholarly efforts. So it is not really only revelation, is it? It's some other input. The science of hadith is relative. What is reliable and what is not reliable is relative based on scholarly opinion. So surely it is not just revelation. So, I just follow Quran and Sunnah. The definition of Quran and Sunnah is not defined by the Quran and Sunnah. It's not. And so somebody coming along and saying, "I just want this," they're trying to make something raw that's not raw, right? It's like saying, "I just want oxygen." You can't have just oxygen. That doesn't exist. When you're breathing in, if you had pure oxygen, you would pass out, right? This is most of what you're breathing in is not oxygen, right? In my body, I just want glucose and oxygen. Or what's going to happen to you if you just have glucose and oxygen? If you live on a diet of glucose and oxygen, you're going to pass out with oxygen, too much oxygen, and you're going to, I don't know, have kidney failure. I don't know what you're going to have if you just have glucose. That's not actually how you imbibe the things that you live on. So how we imbibe the things that we live on, how we imbibe Quran and Sunnah, is not purely through Quran and Sunnah. That's not actually how it functions on any level. Right? The Sahabi who listens to the Prophet ﷺ is processing it through certain logical, linguistic, and other systems. There's a whole lens that they're using. Right? So it's important to understand that. Okay, tradition. So what does it mean? So I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. Many of you have heard this before. The idea that the deen is done and dusted, right? And that's a hyperbole, a major hyperbole, but basically it's done and dusted. What is halal, what is haram, what is the deen, and what is not the deen. Okay? There's fixed sciences, right? Somebody comes along and asks you a question and you say, that is not a question that we just talk about. Like that's not a thing, right? So someone's come along and starts debating with James and says, I don't believe in cells. What are you talking about? Right? Whether cells exist is done and dusted. That is a done and dusted discussion in biology. We're not going to discuss whether or not cells exist. That doesn't make any sense. There are, right? He's going to quote a source and be like, oh, that's not a source. He's like, what are you talking about? Any biology faculty member would understand that this is an authority. What is this? Like, what kind of? So he's submitting his thesis, and they're like, nope, we don't accept it. So why? I'm quoting all of these sources, all of these, these are things that I've done. This is how we do research. And like, nope, I don't accept any of it. And so he's going to be pulling his hair out. Like, what do you want me to do? So there are fixed authorities. Is it halal? It mentions it in this book. There's agreed upon material. We all agree upon this. And there's things that we debate. So somebody comes along and says, well, some scholars say you can join prayers, some scholars you can't. Say, nope, there's Sahih Hadith that says you can. Habibi, we have already agreed to disagree on this issue. We have already agreed to disagree. Niqab is obligatory. We've already agreed to disagree. So it's already there. There's a whole system. It's already there. There is pluralism. We already agree to understand that there is more than one way of looking at things. Right? So as Ibn Khaldun, he says the marketplaces of these religious disciplines have thrived in this religious community in an unsurpassable way. I mean, people have been asking the question, is it halal, is it haram? Do we believe this or do we believe that? Is it like this or is it like that? For the last 800 years. And people Scholars, amazing scholars, have given it their all and they've come to certain conclusions. That's the deen. Take it or leave it. Right? Scholarly discernments have reached a level that cannot be exceeded. You couldn't do any more than what you've done. Nomenclatures have been refined and disciplines have been arranged with a beauty that cannot be outdone. So there is an authority, there are authoritative works, things are useful, right? And pluralism, as you mentioned, Abu Darda, he said, you will not really understand fiqh until you can see multiple ways that the Quran can be understood. This is where the Sahaba, Tabi'een, etc. There's multiple ways that the deen can be understood. Okay. Um, where were we? Pluralism. Sorry. Here, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he said, I do not wish that the companions never disagreed. Oh, if only there was one madhab. It's not like that. There's always been more than one madhab. There's always been more than one way of understanding the deen. Because if there was just one opinion, people would be in a difficult situation. Rather, they are all scholars whom we may follow. So whoever follows any of them is still in the right. It's okay. You're doing something fine, right? And there's various revisionist approaches that, again, this is something I continually talk against. So traditional Islam needs to be reviewed because A, late scholars, the Khalaf, have veered away from the methodology of the early Muslims, right? So yes, the Salaf were right, the Khalaf were wrong. The last, 800 years or so, scholars have not represented the Sunnah. We need to go back to the Sunnah, right? So this is known as the Salafi movement or the Wahhabi movement, right? And that we need to, it's just all off. Okay, and so basically the deen has not been preserved. What Ibn Khaldun has observed as a historian and as a scholar is not true, and the authorities are not there. And you just have to go back and quote Quran and Sunnah again, because when you quote an authoritative work, it is not actually authoritative. So now you have a chaotic system again with nebulous and unclear methodology and very mutating and nebulous authorities, because now we're going to we can now reinterpret the Quran and Sunnah totally. Traditional Islam needs to be reviewed because the goals of the Sharia are no longer being achieved, right? And Islam has been hijacked by extremist blockheads and misogynists since its inception. So this will vary. You'll have different opinions here, right? And so to some extent, all of these revisionist approaches are true to some extent, but not in a complete sense. And so the idea that Islam has been hijacked by extremist blockheads, right? Basically, you don't understand revelation. And misogynists, look, this person, they all hate Muslim. This hadith in Bukhari, it's just there to show how women are bad. It's all been, it's all messed up. We need to basically, you know, go back to the Quran or revisit hadith based on a new LGBTQ plus lens or whatever it is, something like that, right? We need to just totally turn the thing upside down because what I understand God should be doing is not being achieved, right? And so therefore I need to reinterpret it, right? So the Sharia has not been understood and has not been preserved. We need to redo it again. This is a kind of a modernist maqasidi approach that exists in the East and in the West, and is also fundamentally wrong. Tutelage, right? The idea that you study with somebody, you have a mentor, right? You study with somebody. You don't just read books, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ, he said, verily, Allah does not take away knowledge by simply snatching it from people. Rather, he takes away knowledge by taking away the scholars. So even if you had the books there that the scholar uses, it's not the same. So you look to my right, there is 10, 15 times 5, 75, 300, 400, 500 books here in my office. Maybe 800 books in my office. So if Fareed dies and you put somebody else in my chair who's not trained at all, can they use the books? No. But the information is there. ChatGPT has read the same thing that you read. Yeah, but ChatGPT doesn't understand. things. ChatGPT just simply copies, right? And so it's not actually understanding things, nor is it had learned how to understand things. Rather, he takes away knowledge by taking away scholars, so that when he leaves no learned person, people turn to the ignorant as their leaders. Then they are asked to deliver religious verdicts, fatwa, and they deliver them without knowledge. They go astray, and they lead others astray. So this is concept is, that knowledge is a way of being and an ability to process data. Knowledge is not data, right? So again, somebody who comes along and says Quran and Sunnah, no, that's wrong. Quran and Sunnah plus teacher. That's what it is, i.e., the tradition. And that person who will open the door to tradition for you. So that means there's an apprentice, that's a student. There is a master, somebody who actually understands the discipline. There's a textbook, okay? And there are problems, masail. So the issue with the textbook is there to learn an art, right? And as Al-Bajuri explains, he says there's basically kind of three levels that the apprentice goes through. They don't understand the science or the problems. So they're totally they're totally green. I don't even know what is Arabic grammar. What do we talk about? What is fiqh? I don't know what we talk about. And then somebody he now has the masail in his head. What do we talk about in fiqh? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are things we're talking about, right? And then the third level this is what we talk about, and these are the answers, and this is why, right? So that's what we learn. That's what we're basically going through those three levels, right? And so the goal is not the textbook. The textbook is the means. The goal is not the mas'ala. This is a dumb class. Why am I studying about someone with two heads making wudu? That's a stupid thing to talk about. I want to leave this. It's not a Quran, it's not a Sunnah. This is wrong. That the goal is not the textbook. The goal is the malaka, the art, right? So through this process, there is a transfer of an art, right? This person you've now cracked it down, and now this person can use the authoritative corpus, right? So you teach the student how to access the material. They now know how to process the material spiritually and academically, right? And then the master or the apprentice eventually adds to the corpus and makes the corpus great, right? So again, a PhD, right? I don't know what this thing is. I have a master. I do my undergrad. I go through an undergrad. There's a transfer of an art, right? Now I'm accessing the corpus, and now I've published my PhD and I've added to the corpus. Simple as that, right? So the whole PhD master process is from the Muslim world, right? As many people have pointed out. So my message that, right, it's kind of a very long introduction. What's my message? I have a number of messages that I convey in my courses. Number one, the logical objectivity of Islam. The Islam is logically, objectively true. It is not an opinion. I'm not Muslim because it makes more sense or that it would be nice, right? But rather that it is logically defendable, right? And it is the only logical explanation for the universe, right? A pluralistic understanding of Islam, right? So when I say I teach Shafi fiqh, for example, I'm saying this is one understanding. That's what it means, right? So when you say Shafi, you mean there's more than one understanding. This is one of them. And authoritative, this is a solid answer, as opposed to your answer, which is not authoritative, or his answer, which is not necessarily the only answer. So some people who are not pluralistic, they only see that there's one answer, or those who they don't believe in authority. So I'm just anybody can explain anything based on whatever they want to do. The necessity of the apprentice-master relationship. So there's various challenges to this, right? So you see, for example, in the revisionist approach, there is no master-apprentice relationship because the tradition is not there to begin with, right? So there isn't that apprentice-master relationship. You don't, and so it has fundamental problems. Or you get people who are quasi-traditionalist, right? So in many places in the Muslim world today, people are quasi-traditionalist, meaning they will study the former dhahib or they'll study, but they don't actually know them properly. So they go to college and they just do some undergrad in this and undergrad in that, introduction to this, introduction to that, but they don't actually know anything because they've never really studied a matan. They didn't study a traditional text with a teacher and master the art. So you ask them about grammar, they know about grammar, but they don't know grammar. They know about fiqh, but they don't know fiqh. They know about hadith, but they don't know hadith, right? It's like somebody who is, so Christian Arab who would familiar with some concept of tajweed, right? But he doesn't actually know tajweed. So this is a kind of a very sneaky thing is that you'll find these people, I studied all the four madhahib. How did you study the four madhahib? Like, what are you talking about? So when you say somebody is a talib ilm is somebody who studies the mutun, they study the traditional textbooks with a teacher, right? So what's a contrast? This is a general class. This is not a formal class, right? On YouTube, I heard Sheikh Farid, Sheikh so and so, Sheikh are fantastic. General ideas as opposed to specific. Here's a text, cover it from cover to cover, right? So that is knowledge. That's how the Deen has considered that there's these large, corpuses of a science, right? The libraries, and then the textbooks of the Deen. And you have studied the textbooks of the Deen with the teacher. And if you haven't done that, you actually know nothing. You are not even a jack of all trades. You are somebody who likes to just watch stuff, right? You're just religious, but you're not educated. The necessity and efficacy of spiritual change, i.e., you can change spiritually, and you have to. So this is one of the messages I talk about again and again and again, and is you can learn sacred knowledge and change as a person and continue to change as a person, and it's not just something you can do, but it's something that you have to do. And again, a key thing they keep focusing on is getting offline and getting on with people, because an essential part of spiritual change is physically being with people, right? So this is a message that, again, if people on my Q&A, they'll see this quite a lot. So authoritative nature tradition, there is such thing as well-established curricula. There is such thing as well-established reference works, right? Somebody comes along, gives a fatwa, and I can see within 2 seconds. I'll give you an example. I was praying Taraweeh once in Morocco, and the Imam was saying A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem aloud. I just thought it was a bit odd. I've never heard people say in the prayer A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem aloud. So I go up, I go and ask him, like, why are you doing that? And he's like, something, something, something. I said, could you just show me the reference work? So now I know, I'm not a Maliki, but I know what the Maliki reference works are. And he's quoting all sorts of random things. So I know within 3 seconds, this person has no clue. He is not an heir to the tradition. He's just somebody who is exposed to some elements of the tradition, right? But he's not an heir to it, right? And also the importance of the founding works, or the ummahat. So this is one thing that you often lost on traditional scholars, is that they will teach the traditional curricula, but they will stop there, which is a problem, right? It's a problem because there's huge things that are lost when you stop halfway, right? So when you don't, for example, read Imam Shafi'i or Imam Malik, or you don't read, early scholars talking about things, the early scholars are kind of in one world and the late scholars are kind of another world. Now, both worlds are relevant and both worlds are very important, but it's very, very important to do that. You see it in grammar, you see it in tafsir, you see it in hadith, you see it in fiqh, you see it everything, right? It's really important. And I'm not saying that one is right and one is wrong, but I'm saying that you see things in a different light. And it's very important to do that. It's part of that comprehensive approach, right? So the Salafi, for example, would only read the Ummahat because he's not interested in anything late, which is totally wrong, because the only way to the Ummahat is through well-established curricula, right? So here you want to study fiqh and he's going to teach you Sahih Bukhari. That is not a part of the curricula for studying fiqh at all. Or you're studying fiqh through tafsir. Tafsir is not a path to study fiqh. That does not give you the malaka, doesn't give you the art. We're running out of time. Okay, khair. Areas of focus. So I teach fiqh. I think it's very important. Um, it is useful. It is the cumulative work of 10,000 scholars. I'm a Shafi, meaning I studied Shafi fiqh. Am I 100% convinced of every single thing in Shafi fiqh? No. But I'm continually astounded by the refined arguments, the debates, the layers, right? You can see how much research has gone into these things, right? You can see how there's no such thing as blind following. It is critical thought, layer upon layer of critical thought that produces something that you could not compete with. So your understanding of Quran and Sunnah versus 10,000 plus scholars working together in a defined system, right? And benefiting from each other's mistakes, from each other's contributions, you can't compete with it. It's not possible. So studying fiqh is very useful. It's also relevant in life, right? Some people study fiqh, they hate it. This is such a stupid discussion. I hate it. It's not true, right? Fiqh is relevant in life. It is relevant to all of us. We learn things, right? And more importantly, it is essential to spiritual change, right? Learn Arabic, learn fiqh, apply fiqh, change. Basically like that. I mean, a few more things. But, learning fiqh is one of the most important things in your life because every single day I want to know what my behavior and my outward behavior should be, right? So it's very important to do that. And so somebody who doesn't study fiqh or doesn't focus on fiqh, it's a bit concerning because um, it's actually really important, right? Yes, it is, what's it called? Dhanni. It is probabilistic. It's not necessarily the right answer, right? One of my friends, for example, he's not into fiqh. He hates fiqh. He studied fiqh, but he hates it. He's like, this is so lame. Like your arguments are just lame. The proofs are so weak. I say, yeah, the proofs are sometimes weak, but when you have 10,000 people coming together and agreeing on a conclusion, even if the argument is weak, it means that it has a weight. Maybe you can't see the argument. Maybe it sounds strange to you, but it's still useful because 10,000 scholars said that, not just one or two or three or four, but like 10,000 scholars. So it's now useful. It has worth. And there is no substitute. You say, I want a better example. I want something better than the former dhahib. Show me something better than the former dhahib. It doesn't exist. If you know what the former dhahib are and you know the use of it, the volume there, the authority, the research it doesn't exist. Fiqh outside of the former dhahib doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. So you're finding a fault in something, but not finding a better substitute. Hadith. Let me go. Mikhail, can you just send a message on the other group that I'm coming in maybe just in 5-10 minutes? Um,
Okay, inshallah.
Okay, so it says hadith, very important, right? It's the life of our hearts. We're listening to our Prophet speaking, right? So there's something very different in hadith, right? Fiqh is not necessarily very inspiring, right? It is very practical, not necessarily inspiring, but hadith is. Hadith is amazing. It's just on another planet. It's very raw in that you see how spiritual but yet human our religion is. It's very human. It's funny. It's heartbreaking. It's you feel close to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So hadith is very, very important, right? Very, very important. You're understanding the nature of our religion. You understand the complexity of debates. Half the time people are non-pluralistic because they're just ignorant. Like you don't know that there's a hadith that goes against what you're saying. So they say, no, the hadith says this. Yeah, there's another hadith that goes against it. Right? Connecting with the people and places of the past. So one thing I particularly like in hadith is hadith narrators. Oh, this person is in Balkh, this person is in Fustat, this person's in Massis, this person's in Spain, right? I have a hadith book here, for example, just to my right, and it is the Muwatta of Imam Malik as narrated by Al-Qa'nabi. Oh, no, that's another book, sorry. I have it downstairs somewhere. Al-Qa'nabi. Al-Qa'nabi is the teacher of Bukhari. So I am hearing what Bukhari heard from Imam Malik. And this hadith book has been narrated with two chains. At one point in history, goes through two females. So our only sources for this hadith book is females. Like if they didn't exist, we wouldn't know the hadith book. And I find this stuff really interesting. I like people. I like places. I find hadith. It's not theoretical. It's very, people oriented. Arabic language. So number one, we live in an area where there's a war on language, right? English and any language, there's a war on language, and we don't study grammar, we don't study literature, we don't study things, and it's very important to do this. And literary criticism is becoming frequently very stupid and ridiculous. And so there is a war on the objectivity or the nuanced nature of language, which is intentional. So it's important to study language in general. Number two is people, I've seen people suffer, right? People get frustrated or suffer because they don't know Arabic, right? Because they're ignorant. So they see things in one light when it could be understood in three lights or four ways, right? Tasting the Quran. The Quran is a piece of literature, right? It's a piece of literature, right? And so it has to be understood as a piece of literature, meaning you have to taste the rhetoric of the Quran. You can't do that without an intermediate to advanced level of Arabic. Um, Getting an authentic feel of the original teachings. So the stronger your Arabic, the thinner the layer is between you and revelation, right? That thinner that revelate that. So the bigger, the more levels of translation and the more levels of lack of understanding, it's harder. You say, well, this hadith means this according to so and so. Okay, well, can I just read the hadith or read the verse? Like, what does that word actually mean? And then suddenly you see it in a very different light, right? And so it's very important that, grabbing these things. So for me, these are these kind of three things that I focus on. I teach other things as well. I have a theater class now. I have all sorts of classes, but these are the three things that I focus on. These are things that I'm interested in. So any quick questions or queries?
Sheikh, if I'm been following the Hanafi fiqh, would that be problematic or?
Definitely problematic. No, I'm joking.
Hmm.
So no, I'm joking, Ahmad. So I don't teach
Okay.
I don't teach Hanafi fiqh, right? So I no.
I know
Uh,
you teach Shafi or Shafi, right? So,
Okay, so I advise people to go and study. For example, I don't know, like Seeker's Guidance. They have things on Seeker on Hanafi fiqh.
right.
I believe you have Sheikh. Um, yeah, there's some
But I've
shuyukh
said,
in Maqasid.
yeah,
There's various like Irshad, I think .org. I
yeah,
Yeah, that's for
you
Sheikh
said, yeah.
Sheikh Tabriz. I don't know if Sheikh Riyasat, Sheikh Abdurrahim Riyasat, if he has any classes. Um, they have some good classes, but I don't teach those things.
But when you're gonna be teaching fiqh, are you gonna be like
I, I
solely that
I
this
only
is
teach
how
I only teach Shafi.
Shafi?
Yeah.
Shafi madhab.
Yeah.
Okay, okay,
So
okay.
why is that the case? Because teaching comparative fiqh is not sound curricula.
Yeah.
So what you'll find is somebody teaching, like I have a class in Ramadan. It was like halal and haram in the Quran, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke about fiqh, but that's not fiqh, right? That's like James, right? Who's doing his PhD, right? He goes and he's talking to some high school kids about biology, right? You know, but it's
Right.
like he's not really he's pulling all the punches. Like it's not a class. It's just inspiring people. He wants to inspire people to do a degree and do their masters and PhD because it's good and Islamic reasons for it. And he just gives it through a few things. So these are general talks. So the problem is now when you find a university degree where all they did was comparative fiqh, right? So this Salafi Sheikh, for example, all he did was comparative fiqh. And he's quoting Hanafi madhab and Shafi madhab and this. In reality, he doesn't know what he's talking about
Mhm.
because he's a jack of all trades and master of none. So this goes back to the tutelage thing, right? This whole concept of tutelage. He didn't actually graduate from anything, but he sounds like he knows about things. Right? You look on his websites, there'll be this famous Salafi website or Saudi website, whatever, and he'll quote Shafi this. It's actually wrong,
Mhm.
not actually the Shafi school. And it's like, subhanAllah, it's actually jahl. It is exactly what the hadith mentioned. And they're not even intentionally doing that, right? These people will be fairly pluralistic. They'll say, yes, there's different opinions here, but we think this is the wrong. They'd be quite moderate people if you met them and fairly knowledgeable, but they're not actually knowledgeable, right? So, for example, the issue of using calculations, right? The issue of using calculations to establish Ramadan. You will see that scholars saying, all scholars say you can't do it. No, some scholars say you can. In reality, the people who are talking don't actually know the subtleties of the discussion. So therefore, it's actually jahl, it's actually ignorance what's being spread. And that's just how it is. Because you didn't have, let's say, a Shafi'i, he wasn't a Shafi'i that explained the Shafi'i madhab on it, right? I saw that with my own eyes in two people, with Sheikh Nuh Kala, one of my teachers, who I respect and revere, and Sheikh Amjad Rashid, who I respect and revere, and three people, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who I respect and revere, right? So Sheikh Nuh Kala, he spent 17 years on Reliance of the Traveler. 17 years, full time, dedicated. He went through the text with two specialists. Okay. But because he's pluralistic, that's what he received from his teachers, he would mention other positions in different madhahib when it's very difficult. Okay. But there are errors there. Why are there errors there? Because he's not Maliki, because he's not Hanbali, because he's not Hanafi. He studied Hanafi fiqh with a Hanafi scholar, and but what did he do? Is he took Reliance of the Traveler and he sent it to Azhar. He said, Azhar, I want you to go through every single letter of this book and make sure that the Arabic and the English are correct. And he went back and back and back until they signed it. It's right. So Azhar made the mistake and he made the mistake because he's not Maliki. You don't take Maliki fiqh from anybody apart from a Maliki. You don't take Hanafi fiqh from anybody apart from a Hanafi. This is part of our tradition. So he has a good intention, and no one's sinning, no one's bad, but that happened. So that's Sheikh Nuh Kala, Sheikh Amjad Rashid, one of my teachers, right, and my teachers of my teachers. Okay, Sheikh Amjad Rashid. For 10 years, he taught comparative fiqh in Yemen. Okay, so he has a PhD from University of Jordan in fiqh, and he taught comparative fiqh for many years. He's a Shafi though. He was in a class and he mentioned something in the Maliki school. I said, that's not correct. It's like this. He's like, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. And I showed it to him. So he spent I don't know how long in secondary edu no, in what for tertiary education, whatever it's called, undergrad and postgrad in fiqh. And he taught comparative fiqh for 10 years and still he made a mistake. Because you don't take Maliki fiqh from anybody apart from a Maliki. So that was Sheikh Nuh Kala, who I respect and revere, and I'm not criticizing. That was Sheikh Amjad Rashid, who I respect and revere, and I'm not criticizing. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Shafi'i, commentator on Sahih Bukhari, same thing. He's saying the Hanafi said this, I was in the class, and the Hanafi says, that's not the Hanafi school. There we go. All right. Tirmidhi, quoting Imam Shafi'i, makes a mistake. Tirmidhi, quoting Imam Malik, makes a mistake. So if Tirmidhi can make a mistake, and Ibn Hajar can make a mistake, and Sheikh Amjad Rashid and Sheikh Nuh Kala can make a mistake, then what about somebody who is not pluralistic to begin with? Right? So it's key process is that the deen, halal haram, only exists in the four madhahib, and the four madhahib only exist through talaqqi. So if you want, it's like saying, I want tajweed without studying with somebody. If you don't have tajweed, you don't have the Quran. And if you don't study with somebody, you don't have tajweed. So the Quran will disappear, period. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, this is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? And
The
I've
problem
studied,
is there are lots of charlatans. They
yeah.
they will agree with all of my points, but they don't know that they don't know that. Do you understand? So what will happen is they agree with everything I'm saying. They'll listen to this lecture and they'll think 100%. But in reality, they're not trained, but they think that they're trained. That's the issue because they were told, oh, here are the four madhahib, ABC, and then they explain ABC. But they were never taught one madhab. So this is what happened, for example, in University of Jordan, right? A 50-year-old university in the Middle East, Azhar, University of Medina. That's everybody does that. Everybody just teaches comparative fiqh, and it means everybody doesn't know anything. That's what it means. And then your teacher doesn't know anything, and your teacher's teacher doesn't know anything. But nobody knows that they don't know anything. And that's the verse of the hadith says, Dallu wa dallu. They go astray and they send other people astray. And they have a good intention and they're trying their best, but why? Right? إنما حرم الوصول لتركهم الأصول. They were barred from getting to where they wanted to get because they didn't have the usul right.
Farid, I think James also has a question, and just a reminder about Maghrib as well as the next class.
Okay, jazakumullah khair. Okay, go ahead, James.
Sure, I'll try to keep this fairly quick since I know we're coming up on time, and I can also reach out to you privately if it warrants that. But I'm curious what your suggestions are for where someone should start. If, for example, I've only ever been able to sit with a teacher for the absolute beginner, like the encompassing epistle, like very basic Shafi'i fiqh text. So then from there, what of your classes should I begin with?
My classes, I joined the Matan al-Shuja' class. That's the purification class.
Okay, sounds good, inshallah.
But the more important than that, James, is who you so Sheikh Omar Muhsin, right? Sheikh Omar Muhsin as a person. Like if you can physically be with him, right? You just go to the masjid and you see him and he turns around and you walk out. Like physically being with scholars is very important, right? It's a huge thing. He was physically with people who were physically with people who were physically people. This comes in hadith in Sahih Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ said, you will fight these throngs of people, and the question will be asked, who among you saw the Prophet ﷺ? Or sorry, had the companionship of the Prophet ﷺ? And it will say so and so and so and so, and then you will be given victory. Why? Because these people had the sohbah of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, you will fight throngs of people, and it will be said, who saw somebody who had the companionship of the Prophet ﷺ? And it will be said so and so and so and so, and they will be given victory, right? So this thing about the physical connection, right? So right now, inshallah, you're coming out of this class, Iman boost, mashallah, I just did talaqqi. I just connected with my deen and with my Prophet and with my Allah, right? In this class. Yes and no. Because you need to physically be with people. This is really, really important, right? Even if you have to do it once a month, once a year, once a this, whatever, but you'd physically be with people. There's a fundamental difference, right? You might make that connection. So, for example, Sheikh Hamza Karamadi, like what he would do is he would travel in the summer holidays, right? While he was in his undergrad and things like that, so travel in some holidays, sit with people or study with people in the West and travel and then make that connection and then build on that connection. So, yeah, a lot of his education happened online, right? With Vipe and whatever they used to have or whatever it was called back then, but he was physically with those people, spent time in Damascus for he has spent time in Abu Dhabi, or I can't remember where he was, Emirates or something like that, spent time in Jordan, etc. Right? So that it's not, like you don't have to live in that country, but you have to visit these people, right? I don't know if Sheikh Al Mohsen, if he goes to Tarim on a yearly basis or that, or it's like fundamental difference, like night and day, having seen people, having sat with people, right? Even if you didn't cover that much material, because it's just what was the word? An excuse, Mikal? It's just an excuse. There's a phrase for it. It's like anyway, there's like the point of the class is not the textbook. The point of the class is the individual. Everything else is just an excuse to. So that's a key thing, key concept that we have to put in mind. I have to run, inshallah, and I know Sister Livia is and Said also, they're waiting for the class, inshallah. Inshallah, we'll start that in a second. Inshallah, we'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Subhanallah wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.